Spider-Man was in the middle of swinging through a city that wasn't New York. He was thinking about the fact that when you're the funny guy, people don't like it when you stop smiling. It makes them uncomfortable. Now, something is very, very wrong with Spider-Man right now. He believed that when a person's day was awful, they felt like they could always rely on you to cheer them up, or at least assure them that things will get better. But as a spiral pattern formed over his now yellowed visor, Spider-Man admitted that usually, it doesn't get better. This is the deadly neighborhood Spider-Man. Reflecting, Peter would remember having tons of really messed up dreams where everything felt real. He even fought a guy named Sleep Stealer inside his own nightmare world. But although he knew this had to be a dream, it sure didn't feel like one. He also couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been there before. But what he did know was that he was really, really angry and could not stop smashing things. He wondered if this was how the Hulk felt. Continuing to swing through the city as the skyscrapers began to twist and bend around him, Spider-Man admitted to feeling a bit trapped lately. And as one of the buildings formed a monstrous set of eyes and mouth, Spider-Man felt like everything was out to get him. And as he fell with his elongated claws exposed, he'd also add that he was against himself too. An expanded web-based maw would then reach for him as he continued to fight the feeling that he's not doing enough. As it chomped down on him like a Venus flytrap, Spider-Man wondered if his approach to crime fighting, imprisoning his enemies, was a waste of time. But then again, putting them down permanently wasn't exactly his style. That was more of the Punisher's MO, and a big reason why the two always disagreed. As he fell, now with twice as many arms and legs, he realized that he could have been that person if he let Venom stay in his life. Dropping down, Spider-Man adjusted his thinking by remembering that Venom's the sort of crazy ex that knows just the right buttons to push. The sort that'll send you over the edge with a gaslit echo chamber. From there, he entered a chamber that echoed his features in very bizarre ways as he himself took on a far more arachnid form.
I keep messing it up. Over and over, I'm never good enough. I always come up short and people get hurt. Somewhere deep inside, I know there's a version of me who can do better. One where I get it right and leave the world a better place.
Now opening his eyes in the waking world with the same tunnel look in them, Peter remembered that this was the reason he was here. He's in Pasadena, California, specifically in a massive technological laboratory. Speakers and testing systems tower above the work desk he's been sitting at, and there's even a pool of water in front of it. Peter's been working on a project that would be a major medical breakthrough. It's a process that can destroy viruses through water and superconductors linked through Josephson junctions. So he's back to work the moment he wakes up. And thankfully, he's not alone. His research partner that provided the facilities was a woman named Crystal Catani. They'd met through a mutual friend in school. Crystal had the vision and the tech. Peter had the research and the experience. With a smile, Crystal was glad she'd gotten an extra oat milk latte since Peter pulled another all-nighter. Returning the warm greeting, Peter would admit that she'd gotten him hooked on the stuff. Crystal would be quick to ask about their progress. The frequency they're working with is still a bit unstable, but Crystal remained unfazed, convinced that they're really close to success. And in exchange for the latte, Peter had something to show her that he'd been messing around with before falling asleep. Crystal takes it, a little awed, while a happy Peter takes a deep swig of his drink. But that's when he noticed the rock. Taking it into his hand, Peter couldn't shake the feeling that there was something oddly familiar about it. But he already had plans to meet a friend, so he decided to just throw it in his bag for now. As he stepped out, Peter would think about how awful it is to drive in LA. And much to his surprise, his friend's personal driver Duncan was already waiting for him. Duncan is proud of how well he does his job, so he prefers to be as early as he can. Sitting back during the drive across LA, Peter takes the time to look over the rock. There's some intricate carvings on it, but they look ancient. Trying to squint at the tiny markings while the cars kept starting and stopping in heavy traffic made Peter nauseous though, so inspection would have to wait. Soon enough, Duncan's gotten Peter to his destination, Santa Monica Pier. Pete wishes the chauffeur the best before heading over to check with his friend. As he played chess with his friend Bird, who was on the verge of winning, Peter couldn't take his mind off the prehistoric-looking yet human-carved rock. Peter pointed out how all it took was one mistake for everything to fall apart. To this, Bird pointed to pawns being the key, that without their placement there would be no tempo to work with. Even with this explanation, Peter had a hard time seeing things as far out as Bird did. One second he felt like he was a step ahead, and the next he was struggling to keep his head above water. Bird's answer was that he looks at the board as if it's empty. He sees the middle as the mountaintop, and everything else flows from there. Peter knew he'd lost again. Thanks to this, he felt the strange desire to grab hold of the rock. And once he did, everything changed. It was like time and space melted into a painting. And just like that, he returned to the spiraling nightmare realm as the deadly neighborhood Spider-Man. But this time, he saw everything as if he was still playing chess at the pier. As he looked down to his clawed and bloodied hands, he also realized that there's an overlay of his nightmare happening in real time. And just as suddenly, he was out of his own body and looking back at himself as the demented chess pieces flew through the air. The things he sees here are downright horrifying, and somehow, despite not knowing how he got here, Spider-Man knew it was all his own fault. He wondered why, but that was always the question, wasn't it? But this sick melting pot of reality occurred in the fraction of a second as a seagull emerged from it while Bird declared his victory. Giving up, Peter would be told by Bird that he'll only win when he doesn't focus on winning, saying that he needed to let the patterns become a part of him, that nature's patterns are all around us, and he just needs to be attuned to them. Stunned, Peter wanted nothing more than to tell Bird about these dreams he was having, but something held him back. Again, Bird would tell Peter to look for the patterns, even where he least expects to find them, that there is always order to chaos, and chaos to order. Peter would keep it all in mind, and even appreciated their talks more than the games themselves. Smiling at each other while shaking hands, Peter knew where to find Bird if he ever needed him, and Bird always looked forward to their time together. Heading north towards Malibu, the sights and smells of Los Angeles were very different from the streets of New York that Peter was used to. If he walked, it would take hours, which is why he decided to hitch a ride. As he latched onto a moving bus without a mask on, Peter admitted that at times, he couldn't help but miss the building-to-building web-slinging antics of his usual surroundings. But right now, as he changed into his costume on the roof of the bus, Peter wasn't feeling that way at all. Because right now, the view was incredible. But just when he was getting relaxed, Spider-Man spotted a bunch of running teenagers who were screaming for their lives. And it was clear to the hero that it was their first time being off the grid. As he whipped into action, Spider-Man was thankful that the kids weren't too far from the nearest highway or Starbucks, so they shouldn't have trouble getting to some semblance of safety. As he swung into action, one of the kids would cry out for help, begging Spider-Man to stop it from eating them. Charging towards them was a massive black bear, which was insane! Black bears were supposed to have left the Santa Monica Mountains after the late 1800s, but maybe this one just didn't get the message. Despite the creature's hulking size, Spider-Man shot a web right at its mouth. But even that was not enough to stave off the bear's ferocity as it swung at Spidey, whose reaction time wasn't the best thanks to all the bad dreams. As he bound one of the bear's claws, he felt the fatigue of his recent all-nighters. As it swung at him a final time, Spider-Man would compliment the bear before webbing it up even more and pulling before slamming it to the ground. And once it was down, he proceeded to spam his webs at it until it could not move at all. Afterwards, Spider-Man would try to get in contact with Animal Control, but unfortunately the service wasn't very good where he was. But after swinging by the nearest road, he was able to explain the situation and even gave the fake name of Jimmy Gomez. From there, it didn't take him long to make it to his temporary home. He wondered if it was weird to miss the less glamorous parts of New York. This Malibu home was made available to Peter thanks to his friends Randy and Janice, and although it was a bit overwhelming for a city kid, Peter felt like he could get used to it. As he sat, Peter again decided to take a look at the strange rock. The one person who might know what it is isn't around, so it was up to him and scientific deduction to figure it out. Looking closer, it was as if the markings were telling a really tiny story, and he couldn't help but feel like he knew that story. Yet again, Peter returned to the nightmare, absolutely certain it was thanks to the rock as he gripped it in his wretched hands. He wasn't in costume here, but found himself in a labyrinthine maze. A convenient mirror showed his now elderly physique, and surprisingly, he didn't look half bad. But just then, a voice called out to him. A hooded figure then appeared, telling Peter to hand the rock over. Pete knew he was in a scenario stitched together by his subconscious mind, but as the figure approached with their oversized handgun, it still somehow felt incredibly real. Revealing itself to have the head of a raven, the creature would be told that it doesn't need to do this, as oddly, Peter no longer had the rock in either hand, and those hands weren't hideous either. The crow admitted that it indeed had to, as change was inevitable, saying that becoming is an active process from being. As the weapon discharged, he'd say that Peter would be met by a new becoming out of an old being that would bring about a new beginning, which ultimately ended the dream for Peter before he could respond. Peter woke just as Randy and Janice entered the house. Janice was already complaining about Peter not taking the time to put away his cereal bowls, while Randy reminded her that the guy was in the middle of slaving away to save the world. Looking at his sleep-deprived friend, Randy wondered if Peter was ready for Joshua Tree over the weekend. Peter completely forgot about the agreement, but Randy would assure him that they'd do all the planning so Peter could focus on enjoying himself. They also had some supermarket sushi to feed him, which is pretty hype. Later, Randy would wonder about Pete's new lab partner, excited to meet her. Peter would sing Crystal's praises before pointing out how bizarre and unexpected the basis of the project happened to be. But he wasn't complaining. As their driver spoke of punctuality to an event, Peter wondered where the couple was going, before realizing that he was going with them to a get-together in downtown LA, which Randy admitted Peter wouldn't be able to refuse. Almost an hour went by, and they were still driving as Peter again was not a big fan of the slow travel speeds. But finally, they arrived at their destination. Once inside, Janice and Randy introduced Peter to their friend Ada, who was responsible for all the artwork around them. Ada explained to Peter that her work is focused on representing the crossroads between people's digital ontology connected to their physical nature, pointing to the spiral pattern behind her as an example. Ada added that the coding that created the artwork uses the Fibonacci sequence to achieve her desired look. And that was the moment when it all clicked for Peter. With that, he thanked her for being his muse before running off since there was something he needed to do. Downtown LA felt much more like Peter's usual stomping grounds. As he let Crystal know that he was on his way back to the lab, Spider-Man thought to himself that the answer had been staring him in the face the entire time. It was the spirals! Or more specifically, the Fibonacci sequence connected to it. As he gave her a hint, Crystal quickly picked up on his points before some strange noises interrupted them and Crystal herself screamed out. Spider-Man was now worried about her, and just then Spider-Man was spotted by the LAPD for the first time in the form of a helicopter. Notorious for keeping up with high-speed chases, they'd warned Spider-Man that he was in a restricted airspace, telling him to return to the street and wait for an officer, but Spider-Man was up for the challenge of evading them. Wondering which direction to go in, Spider-Man would be issued one final warning to return to the ground immediately to receive a ticket for a moving violation. And once Spider-Man landed on a nearby rooftop, he wondered if the nightmare was leaking through into reality as he observed a swirling door before him. Grabbing hold of the knob, he figured there was only one way to find out. As he stepped through, it felt like his body had been rearranged completely and put back together. The good news was that he didn't hear the sound of the helicopter anymore. The bad news was that the vertigo he was experiencing had him on the verge of throwing up his dinner. And just like that, Spider-Man found himself inside the Rose Bowl, a football field in Pasadena. From behind, a pair of guards would tell him that the field was off-limits and that he needed to leave the area or be arrested. And as if these guys weren't ugly enough, their faces began to meld together, along with their flashlights as Spider-Man tried to leave peacefully. But it was too late, as the deadly neighborhood Spider-Man now faced a reptilian flashlight monster that let out a hauntingly unexpected cry. Discarding a searing torrent of light from its head, Spider-Man would dodge out of the way while making vegan jokes. Realizing that they must be some sort of manifestation of his imagination, Spider-Man didn't want to hurt them. But as electricity crackled from the monster, Spider-Man recognized how badly they wanted to hurt him. So deciding he didn't have time for this, the web crawler decided to leave. And as he swung away, things got very, very strange as he realized he was really scared for the first time. One moment, he was his usual self, rushing through the city as fast as he could, and the next, he was deadly, swinging through a swarm of massive bats towards a landmark. Landing to see a monster frog and a monster snail, Spider-Man was disappointed to see his own nightmare be so lacking in creativity. But as he smelled the frog's putrid stench through his suit along with its slimy skin as it rushed from behind him, there was no way this was a dream. Grabbing hold of the snail with his web, Spider-Man crushed the frog, which exploded onto him in a horrible spray of guts. Rushing into the building, as he opened the doors to see the monster menagerie awaiting him, Spider-Man knew better than to hope he'd imagine a marshmallow monster this time. Spider-Man tore through these things, kicking through one, decapitating another, and giving them each what they gave him, only harder. And once he'd scattered enough monster bits everywhere, he was ready to save Crystal. But as he emerged while removing his mask, the scenario playing out wasn't what he was expecting, as Crystal was perfectly fine, saying that he wasn't planning on coming in until he called her. Apparently, Crystal never noticed his call at all, but was excited to say she'd had a mathematical breakthrough, so his timing was perfect. And Peter already knew what she had in mind. 1.618. They'd both discovered the golden ratio. And just like that, they were ready to commence. After Peter pressed the button, the two looked on as he thought to himself that scientific progression was motivating enough for him to set aside his strange day as if a switch had been instinctively switched. But from there, he'd admit that if he'd known what would happen next, he would never have activated the signal. As a monstrous claw emerged from the water, Peter noted that he'd done so in the name of science and for the sake of progress. As a massive demon bear emerged with glowing red eyes and scythe-like teeth and claws, Peter wondered if progress was always the best motivator when entering the unknown. Because progress always leaves blood on a trail, where they could never know the real cost of their actions until it was already too late. For more insane and ruthless Spider-Man stories, check out our video on Savage Spider-Man.